Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Katrie and today I'm going to be sharing another book review with you guys. Alright guys, so today's book review is going to be a little bit different, and that is because it is the first Christian nonfiction that I'm going to be reviewing, so I'm not quite going to do it exactly the same. I don't think I'm going to go like pros and cons with this because it is a little bit of a different genre. I think I'm just gonna tell you guys what this is about, give my rating, and then just kind of talk about it, what I liked about it and what impacted me and the overall message and stuff. So yeah, let's get into it. Alright, so today's video is about Radical. This is by David Platt. So again, like I said, this is a Christian nonfiction. This was actually my Women's Christian Nonfiction Book Club's pick of the month. This was very good. Somebody else suggested this for our book club. I have picked out quite a few since I'm the one who started it up, but we have had a few suggestions, and this was one that was suggested by a dear friend of mine, and I've got to say I think she did a very good job suggesting this. Sorry about the thunder if you can hear that. It is storming, but I finished this a little late and I still wanted to get this video filmed and posted on time for you guys. So if you hear thunder, I apologize, but you know, God controls the weather. I don't, so I can't do nothing about it, you know. So basically this, on the front it says taking back your faith from the American dream. And this is kind of the little blurb on the back. What is Jesus worth it to you? It's easy for American Christians to forget how Jesus said his followers would actually live, what their new lifestyle would actually look like. They would, he said, leave behind security, money, convenience, even family for him. They would abandon everything for the gospel. They would take up their crosses daily. But who do you know who lives like that? Do you? So I didn't read the back before reading this because I don't normally. But I got like a different impression from just this little blurb on the front than the back does give a little bit of a better impression of what the book is actually about. So this book, where do I start? This book is basically about what Jesus taught how the disciples were to live as his disciples. And it goes over some of the verses that he mentions, certain things, and there is talk of the verse, go unto all nations and make disciples. That verse is talked about and brought in multiple times, and I think the entirety of the book really centers around that verse, which, by the way, I said this was a rich book, and I don't know if you guys can see that I have highlighted a lot in this, so especially towards the end here. I very much did like this. I very much did enjoy it. But yeah, the whole premise of the book really centers around that verse, really centers around like that passage, and it basically like all comes down to this is kind of seen in Christianity and the Christian churches and the Christian movement, whatever you want to call it, in all of these different Christian sects today as well, this is a calling to some, because obviously not everybody's supposed to go to every single nation, yada, yada, yada. And basically he's saying in this book, like, Jesus did not tell, hey, all of you but Stephen, go and do this. He told all of his disciples, go and make disciples of all nations. So that was kind of like his first thing, and the thing that kind of really brings the whole book together is that this is a message to all believers. So I really liked that. I really loved just the message of the book. I liked the way he presented it. It was a very easy to read book also. It wasn't like super like intellectual to where it was hard to read or, you know, had a bunch of super big words or anything. Like I don't think this is one that is going to be a struggle. I think it was pretty easy to read and pretty basic and simple the way he put it. He used a lot of verses. I do enjoy that. I don't like it when I read a Christian nonfiction and they're talking about stuff and they might make like a reference, but they don't actually reference what they're talking about in the Bible. There are notes in the back for other verses and stuff that he does reference throughout it, because he doesn't put all of them in there, but they are in the back. And there are some that just talk about it and, oh, well, when Jesus did this or whatever, or they won't even mention it, and they'll just be like, this totally goes with, and I'm like, well, where's your biblical context? I gotta have biblical context, guys. So this did have biblical context, and I appreciated that. All of his points and his chapters centered around a verse or a passage, which I really enjoyed. There is a chapter about money in this, and like giving and stuff like that, and tithing, and the passage that he used for that was I think it was Matthew 10 somewhere. I might be saying the wrong one, but it's the one when the rich man comes to Jesus and asks, Lord, like, what must I do to be saved and to, go to heaven and everything? I've done all these other things. And he says, go and sell all your possessions and your reward will be great in heaven. And he goes away sad. And he kind of talked about that. And I really liked that section because he talked about how in the church, there's like a split of, oh, well, this wasn't, like this clearly isn't meant for everyone. And the author talked about how you hear a lot of sighs and a lot of, oh, yes, of course. Isn't that a relief that we don't have to follow that? And it was so funny. His comment on that was, if you're the one who sighed at, oh, this isn't for everyone, then guess what? Jesus meant it for you specifically. And I was like, oof, oof. But I thought that was good. And I was a little skeptical going into this because I did read the little blurb of David Platt on the back, and he is a pastor of a mega church in Alabama. And normally I am very hesitant and stay away from most mega churchy things because a lot of times they aren't doctrinally sound. I was very surprised at how doctrinally sound this is, and how humble he was about how he's, he was very humble about not being perfect and about them not doing whatever, but at the same time, he gave so many amazing stories of his church and this flock. And I know this church is not perfect. No church is perfect, but for a church that is that large, it seems like they have been doing a pretty good job, because you don't see that a ton in those mega churches. And there's a lot of good coming out of that. And there was a lot of encouraging stories. That was another thing I loved. I love reading encouraging stories. It really, you hear heartwarming, tearful, but encouraging stories, and whether they're all mixed together or all separate, and they really like help spark the light and keep the light inside you, like lit and aflame and really burning. And I really enjoy it when when books like this do include some stories. I did love that he put so many from his own church and the people that he knew in his church. Most all of these were people that he knew. He did do some older, like, Christian history, and I also really loved that. I really did love that. He gave quite a few names and stories that I didn't know, and I really enjoyed that, and I highlighted those also. So I really enjoyed that. That was definitely a bigger mark for me personally, because I love that type of stuff. But yeah, guys, this was so rich. There was, while I'm on that, he mentioned some John Wesley, John Calvin, like Jim Elliot, like a lot of big names that he did mention and reference. And John Wesley in particular, he gave a story about him going out and buying paintings, basically. And then when his chambermaid came in, he realized she was shivering. She was cold. She didn't have a coat, and winter was approaching. And he goes to reach in his pocket to give her money for a coat, because he's a Christian and he's not going to let his chambermaid, be cold and die of, and he finds that he doesn't have enough. And this hits him really hard. The things that he says, let me see if I can find that section, because this was really impactful for me, and it was very rich. It struck him that the Lord was not pleased with how he had spent his money. He asked himself, "Will thy master say, 'Well done, good and faithful steward'? Thou hast adorned thy walls with the money that might have screened this poor creature from the cold. O justice, O mercy, are not these pictures the blood of this poor maid?" Like, I think you can tell that he was like, theologian. Oh my goodness. That was just like really impactful, because you don't think about the things that you might have that could be sheltering somebody else from the cold if you had that money to put towards that could be feeding somebody. And he talked a lot about, that there are, and again, encouraging stories. There are passages in the Bible of going out and feeding the poor and the hungry and clothing them and stuff. And he talked about how there are like, I can't even remember the number, but 20-something thousand children who die of starvation every day. And he's like, what if that was your child? Like, or when Christians think about that, they use it as a threat to their children. Like, there are kids starving and dying and stuff, and you won't eat your food. But why aren't we doing anything about that, And there was one about, he said that he had actually preached and was going over the passages that talked about caring for the widow and the orphans especially. And he said that and the church as a body felt so burdened by that. They went out and looked at what the need was in their section of Alabama, and it was like, I want to say 130 or something thousand, and they got like 20,000 more families signed up than there was kids to foster and adopt. And I was like, that's amazing. That is God right there. So it definitely had some really encouraging stories. There was another part about John Calvin, and he talked about some of his preaching on 2 Corinthians 8-9. And in conclusion to that preaching and what he had learned from it, he basically said that all churches, no matter what, should be giving half of their entire, their money, their budget to the poor. Whether that church is making $1 million or 500, half of it should be going to the poor. This is how we should be living, how Jesus has told us to live. And it was very humbling and very it really grasped me in a lot of those aspects, because that's something that's bothered me, especially when going to different churches, is I've seen that my money has not gone to things. Or we used to go to a church, and I was so mad about the way they spent their budget, because when I was old enough and I was 18, I went to the budget meetings and I looked over their budget, and we had thousands of dollars worth of decor in their budget that they used for decor around the church. And I was like, really? This is what you're using your money on? And it wouldn't have bothered me as much if they were using it, more of it on other things. But I didn't feel like they were. They didn't announce missions trips very well, to where I even knew about it until the last minute. And they never paid for it either. This church had such an abundance of money. They could have paid, because they didn't have hundreds of people going on mission trips. They only ever had 10 to 20. So they could have easily paid everybody's way to go on the mission trip to make sure everybody could afford it, but they never did. They never even offered people, at least that I know of. Don't whatever me on that, but I did, I just remember seeking out and asking about it, and they weren't offering it to me or anything. So I don't know if they offered it to somebody else, but again, there were great aspects about that church, but that was one thing that I hated about it, is that they were flourishing, and God was blessing them with the numbers and with the financial stability that they were getting and how much they were getting, and it seemed like they started to hoard it instead of continuing to give it to the community, continuing to put it towards God's work. And I really didn't like that. And my last church before we moved here is a small little church in a small little town in the mountains, and this church was physically doing more for the community than I ever saw that church doing. And that was so impactful to me. They talked about it every time you came to church, on Sundays, Wednesdays, whenever you came. They talked about what they were doing in the community. They had multiple things. And this church made nowhere near as much as the other church that I went to. But when I put my my money and the offering, I knew of 5 or 6 things off the top of my head that this money was gonna go to directly. And that was such a comfort for me. And so that's something that's really like big to me. I don't like it when I don't know, and when the church doesn't talk about in what ways they're using the money of God's people to serve the communities and to, you know, in more ways than just out in the church, you know? So that was something that that chapter especially really stood out to me, and I really liked that chapter a lot. Honestly, guys, this was so inspiring. It had me thinking of, you know, like thinking, what can I do? What can I do? I want to do more. And it was really inspiring. And it did end with like a little end message challenge thing of like how to become and start living your life out radically. And that was one, you had to do like 5 things. The first thing was to pray for the entire world. The second thing was to read through the entire word. And this was all in a year. He wanted you to do this in a year because he kind of like went through the preface of, there are some things that, you know, you can't sustain for 10 years, but you can for a year. There are some things you can't give up for 10 years, but you could for a year. So his premise was kind of like, just do this for a year. See, you know, how it goes. See how you can change. And so the second was read through the entire Word of God. There was a lot of stuff towards the beginning, especially about how people in other countries are, you know, they're hiding in shelters and secret meeting places to read passages, and we let our Bibles sit. They could be killed for that, and we let our Bibles sit. We could have some like harsh words said to us most of the time. That's about the worst that you're gonna get in America right now, and we should be grateful for that. But like, we let it take advantage, and we don't sit down and read the Word as much. You know, I don't think anybody could say that they read it enough, you know, like it's just, can you read that enough, you know? And then number 3 is to sacrifice your money for a specific purpose. And that was another thing that he used the word sacrifice because he didn't want it to be like this excess, like you just, well, you know, we've got extra money. He wanted it to be an intentional, you're sacrificing. It's not a sacrifice unless you give more than you should, unless you give more than you can. And in whatever way you do that or how you do it, but you need to actually be giving, not just like, oh, well, I always have this extra that never gets whatever, or, you know, like it's not a excess thing entirely. So, and then number 4 was spend your time in another context. So this was about going somewhere outside of your community, outside of your, basically your city. He said, he didn't even say that you had to, like, it's not like you didn't all have to go to China or Africa or anything like that. You just all had to get out of your city, out of, you know, a couple hours from where you live and go and serve somewhere else. And he basically said for 2% of the time, which amounts to about a week a year, you should go and serve somewhere else, basically. And then number 5 was commit your life to a multiplying community. Basically, there he was just talking about being part of a church so that you can actually, because you're all supposed to be doing this, you're supposed to be doing this with the body, you should be in membership with the church. And that was that one also kind of hit me a little bit because we're new to the area. We're still trying to like figure out what church we want to go to. And he was like, don't stop church hopping, stop whatever, and like find that body of believers that you need to be with, that you can help and they can help you, and get to it. And so I think that's gonna bring up a lot of good conversations for me and my husband. I might get him to read this also. I have been telling him a lot about it, but it was very rich, guys. Very good. I am leaning towards, like, I'm back and forth between a 4.5 and a 4.75 for this. This was a really good book. It was very rich. For all you Christians out there, I would highly suggest it. Recommend. Absolutely. Is very good. Is very good. I have no idea how expensive this normally is. I do think that it is a good few years old, but I picked this up at a thrift store for $2. So I know that I got a steal on it. But I'm sure that you could find it on Amazon or anywhere else. So the copyright is 2010, so it's almost 15 years old now. Wow, but it was really good, guys. It was honestly really good. There were some things I was skeptical about, but nothing stood out to me, and I don't remember anything as being like, I don't like that, or that's wrong, or I'm not sure about that. It was pretty just simple stuff, a lot of encouraging stories, a lot of like taking from those Bible stories of what Jesus commands of all Christians, and it was kind of like a call to action. So I definitely feel like, you know, I definitely feel like motivated, and I definitely feel like I'm wanting to know how I can do more and do better in my community. I'm wanting even more so now to get settled with a church somewhere, just to find that body, because I've been antsy for that to begin with. But yeah, it was a really good book, and I definitely recommend you guys check it out. Thank you so much for listening to all my ramblings. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, this was a little bit different because I basically just talked about it and rambled the whole time. I just feel like it's a little bit hard to give pros and cons for a Christian nonfiction like this, but this is my first time doing this, so let me know what you guys thought. If you liked this, if you'd like to hear more reviews on Christian nonfictions that I read, just let me know in the comments below. If you've read this, what do you think about it? And I hope I will see you guys next time in my next video. Bye, guys.